My name is Uli Klenke. I work at the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the NIH. I'm there the Director of Resilience Programs, and I'm so excited to be able to welcome you today to our first part of our Mental Health and Well-Being of Biomedical Researcher series. This is our sixth iteration of this series, and we are so excited to have you here with us today. The topics of the series that will be held monthly from now on. We will be talking today about burnout in biomedical researchers. And then next month, we will be focusing on healthy rest and how that is a stepping stone to productivity and well-being. And that will be followed in May by the epidemic of loneliness. And then we will end the series in June with how important it is to support each other in well-being. We do this because we all know that, in the biomedical field, we've seen more and more issues with mental health and well-being. And so we are trying to focus on that and raise awareness about it. And I'm here with Annie Shiner and Laurie Chaikin-McNulty, who are going to present our topic today. And both of them have been working with the OIT for more than 8 or 9 years and been working with our trainees and our faculty and staff. And I'm really excited to have them talk to you about burnout in biomedical researchers. What I do want to bring up as well is that we have another session on this with discussion and skills base that will happen next Thursday. It's part of our Thriving Thursday series at the OITE. And I will be sending out the link for that in an email after this presentation, as well as post that later in the chat. So without further ado, thank you, Annie and Laura, for giving our presentation today.
Thank you, Uli. I'm going to start a bit by just talking about burnout, and I really appreciate everyone being here. I think this is, as Uli said, I've been in the field with OITE for a while, and thinking about burnout is something that I talk about a lot, and I'm really happy we can have a dedicated hour to think about it together. Today, we're going to start by thinking about job burnout. So I think to just be very specific, that this is a type of stress related to what's happening at work. It can impact us in all parts of our life, but really the origination of burnout that we're going to talk about today, it starts at work. And this is something that develops progressively. So it's not something that you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're burnt out. This is something that I think probably most people here sort of either know or have experienced, that this sort of increases over time. And the important thing to remember is that if this is left unattended, it can become persistent and chronic, and it can lead to negative outcomes, both at work and in personal life. So it's something that's really important that we attend to burnout. And just being here and learning about it is piece of that puzzle, and we're going to talk about strategies. It involves behavioral stuff, emotional stuff, and interpersonal issues. So I think sometimes when we think about burnout, we think about it as a very internal thing. It's something that we're going through inside of us. Often we wonder, are other people noticing it? But burnout comes out not only in this emotional way, but also in the actions that we take and in our interactions with people around us. The thing to kind of keep our eye on throughout this is that it can be really challenging to pinpoint burnout sometimes, which is why we're going to kind of go through an in-depth investigation of what this really is and what it looks like, because a lot of the things that we experience in burnout can be attributed to other things. So if you are stressed about a particular paper, or you're stressed about trainees will say to me, I'm really worried about this one thing or this one application, or I'll talk to faculty and they'll be very worried about a particular thing. It can feel overwhelming, overworked, but burnout is a very particular thing that we want to make sure that we're catching so that it doesn't interfere with all of these domains. So there's three dimensions when we think about sort of the definition of burnout. It impacts us across three dimensions. So to help differentiate, well, what's burnout and what's other work stress, you can really think through these three domains. So the first of which being emotional exhaustion. And I know it's a lot of words and we put it up here just so you could come and look back at it, but to kind of start just by focusing on emotional exhaustion. So this is really that tiredness that sets in, really feeling drained and fatigued by the demands of work. It leads to more than feeling tired, it's almost exhaustion, and it becomes very challenging to muster up the energy required to tackle tasks in a way that we want to. I often will hear about burnout when people are saying, I know I have this thing to do and I know it's on my schedule and I just can't get myself to do it. I just can't get that energy to get going on this project or this experiment or writing. I know I have this big thing of writing that I need to do and the clock is ticking and yet I cannot have the energy to do it. So that weariness or tiredness, it really makes it incredibly challenging to get done what you need to get done or collaborate with who you need to collaborate with. That's one characteristic, and I think we often notice that one. And then it can lead to, right, another dimension, which is cynicism or depersonalization. So these are a little bit different. So depersonalization being just sort of a disengagement, disinterest in what's going on, not feeling very connected. You're going through the motions. You might be doing things and feeling really apathetic about what's happening or even frustrated. And the cynicism can kick in when you're starting to realize that you're finding yourself being negative or agitated or just really feeling that loss of idealism or any kind of enthusiasm or excitement or desire to get the work done. Oftentimes, I'll hear people say, oh, I have to go to another meeting, right? Or you're in a meeting and you can't really even focus on what's happening or being said because you're feeling so cynical about everything that's happening. That can be a sign of this cynicism and depersonalization. And because of that, you may find yourself avoiding interpersonal interactions or just disconnecting or feeling particularly having unhelpful thoughts through interpersonal interactions because of this disconnection you're feeling, this apathy and this frustration. Now you can see how these things would also lead to reduced personal achievement. So this negative view of not only yourself and yourself at work, but a negative view of what your efficacy can be. And I just really want to point out that, we'll talk about burnout both being sort of an individual thing and also relying on our system of what's going on around us, our environment. But this reduced personal achievement may be, I can't do anything. I'm not going to get this done. It's not going to be good. So why should I try? It also may be, why should I try? Because the environment isn't supporting me to get anything done, right? So there's both an internal piece of this reduced personal achievement as well as an external piece. This can intensify imposter fears that maybe are just beginning or already there, and just increase the doubts about your ability, about whether or not you're going to be able to perform in the ways that you want to. Because of this, right, there might be an actual decrease in your efficacy, right? If you're feeling exhausted, if you're depersonalized, if you're detached, and you're not feeling like you're going to be effective, this can lead to actually having decreases in your productivity, and then a hyper focus on that, which can lead to shame and guilt and just a lack of self-compassion. So these three pieces are really important to remember to help you differentiate between what's job stress, what's maybe expected stress, what's maybe even increased stress, and what's burnout. There are three subtypes of burnout that we just want everyone to be aware of. So I think we think of this frenetic and worn out type as burnout, and we kind of don't touch on the under challenged piece as much. The frenetic may seem familiar to you. This is sustained, intense overwork, right? This is working to the point of exhaustion on a regular basis. And you then, because of that, are limiting your attention to your personal health, which eventually will cost work efficacy. I mean, if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, if you're not taking care of yourself in any way, if you're not doing things outside of the research that brings you joy, this is going to eventually lead to struggle within work. I often will come across this type of burnout as unrecognized burnout of people saying, well, this is what I have to do to be productive. Or the converse is people are burnt out and they say, when I do take a break or I do take a rest or I'm not working at 1,000%, then I'm not feeling like I'm being productive. So just to be aware that this can really easily be confused with productivity. There's always going to be times and moments in your career where you have to, where you may have a deadline or something coming up where you push a little harder than you typically would. But this frenetic burnout is sort of an ongoing, consistent work until exhaustion. It's a different thing and it leads to those three dimensions. Worn out sometimes looks and comes from a lack of control, either in your work or your work outcomes. So either you're not in control of what you're doing on your daily, or you're not in control of what your project is, or in you're noticing that within the daily experiments or the daily writing, there's a lot of micromanagement and you're not allowed to sort of be in charge of it, as well as the outcomes. So to keep in mind, you may have a lot of freedom in your day-to-day and what you're choosing to do, but what journal you're submitting to, or when you're doing it, or which conferences you're allowed to go to, that can work outcomes can be challenging, or what the people around you are doing with your work. That can lead to feeling worn out and having that worn out type of burnout. This also may come from limited external recognition. So maybe you're doing a lot, but you're not getting a lot of feedback either in your group, or maybe a collaborator isn't exactly acknowledging and you feel like they're taking some things from you, or even lack of recognition of you work really hard and you're getting a bunch of rejections or a ton of edits that are unrealistic. So that can also lead to a worn out type of burnout, which you could see would lead to sort of a feeling of hopelessness. Like, I am doing all of these things and I'm not necessarily getting the results that I'd be hoping for. We then tend to disconnect or neglect or avoid, feel incompetent. And then because of those things, feel a sense of guilt, like, oh, well, I'm disconnected, and then I feel bad about that. The other subtype that we don't always sort of touch on or see as being burnt out is this under challenge. So if you're understimulated, if you're under challenged, if the work is boring, it's not rewarding, this can also result in that sort of cynicism and that disconnection or avoidance. Things to keep in mind. Now, obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, but there are a lot of things that can trigger burnout. So we talked a little bit already about the intensity of demands and the nature of being overloaded with work. So that can really trigger burnout if there's just a lot all the time and you're working 55, 60, 70 hours a week. You're coming in on weekends consistently. It's not sort of I need to get something done, so I'm going to come out one time. It's consistently having high demands, not even sort of counting the demands that you have within your personal life. Another thing that can really trigger some of these burnout factors is disappointments and perceived lack of progress. So if you're working really, really hard and you feel like you're not getting anywhere, or the experiments aren't quite working, or you feel like you've gotten somewhere and you get either a rejection or you're not getting the money you need, all of these things, right, can lead to these disappointments. It also can look like lack of support, right? That you are feeling like you could do what you needed to do, but the environment isn't really set up to support you in that, or the people around you aren't giving you the support that you need to get to that next place. There's also, we can be triggered by a lack of autonomy or self-control. So if you're feeling very much like you have ideas or you'd like input and that is not happening, that can lead to burnout, because again, if we're thinking about efficacy and feeling effective, that can really lead people to feel ineffective. There can be burnout when there are unclear or ambiguous expectations. So this looks like having uncertainty around what you're supposed to do. I'd sometimes call this the moving target, where you think you're supposed to be doing one thing and then it turns out you should be doing another, or you have a conversation and there's a miscommunication. That can really lead to a lot of burnout because of the stress of feeling like I can't quite hit what I need to. This also looks like poor supervision and toxic work environments. When we think about putting in the amount of hard work that is required of being a scientist, when then you come into an environment that is toxic, of course, that is going to lead to both the cynicism, the depersonalization, the exhaustion, and the reduction in efficacy. There also, I think it's fair to think about the fact that sometimes work demands and personal demands can conflict with each other, and that expectations around that, when they are unbalanced, can lead to a burnout, as well as, as part of that toxic environment, sort of experiencing or witnessing unfair treatment of others. So when we go through these, it really makes sense if you think about those three dimensions playing into these triggers. Now, the impact of this, I think, if you've experienced burnout or you've seen someone experiencing burnout, you can see that it impacts people across domains. And just to be very, clear about it, we wanted to break down those domains of what you might be seeing, so that as you start to reflect and think, is this stress? Is this burnout? You can take a look at these different areas and say, am I impacted in some of these areas? So for a psychological domain, the cognitive functions that you have may be impacted. So that's your executive functioning needs, your memory, your problem solving, your decision making, your attention span, your task initiation. Those really critical things that you need to do science and do it well, those can start to be impacted, as well as your emotional needs, your mental health, and just overall satisfaction with life. If you're noticing you're always irritable, or it's very hard to take a look at what's going on with how you're feeling about yourself, that may be a sign of burnout, as well as behavioral. So these things may be happening sort of more internally, and then you start to think about what's happening behaviorally. What are the signs that you may notice? So you may engage in some unhelpful coping if these things are weighing on you, including numbing out, especially if there's exhaustion there, checking out, using screens, using substances, and engaging in intense avoidance, not responding to emails for days and weeks at a time, or skipping meetings, or not showing up in lab meetings, that type of thing, as well as just a general reduction in your work performance, right? Which then may cyclically lead back into you feeling even more burnt out. And then even sort of in an extreme scenario, really counterproductive, anger outbursts, aggression, intense blaming of others and yourself, misuse of materials. So this can come up with intense burnout. You may also notice physical health issues. So there are a lot of studies on the physical health impacts of burnout, such as physical pain, muscular and skeletal pain, GI issues, heart issues, headaches. You may find yourself getting sick more. You may find that even though you're very fatigued, you're struggling with sleeping. And there's also sort of research on high cortisol levels. It may also, you may notice just a change in the community that you're in, right? So if the community has low morale, or increased conflict, or decreased productivity in the group, maybe that multiple individuals are feeling burnt out. So if this is something where you notice this in your group, there may be a larger discussion to be had in something like a research group meeting about burnout and its implications, and what we can do to sort of support people through that process to shifting back to feeling more effective and less exhausted. So here are just a few signs. I think I've talked a good bit about what it is that shows up when burnout is present, but these are sort of some daily things you can say, this might be either myself or someone I know managing burnout. So consistent, of course, all of these things may happen, but these are more of a consistent show of things like being late for meetings, canceling meetings, increasing how critical you are around yourself and your colleagues, feeling more sarcastic and less patient. You may find yourself making more mistakes. I think people will often tell me the more burnt out they are, the harder they're working, because oftentimes they're having to do things 2-3 times. You may find yourself withdrawing from group activities, which makes sense if you were feeling cynical, depersonalized, exhausted. and sort of pushed, you may find more emotional outbursts with colleagues. You may be feeling more anger and feeling less able to regulate those emotions. Sort of going back to issues with getting the work done, you may find yourself failing to meet deadlines again and again, failing to meet the commitments, not showing up to the call with your collaborators, or showing up and not having done the work that you were wanting to get done again and again. You may then go off and make a to-do list or have a bunch of to-do lists and then struggle to prioritize what's urgent and important. And then when working through that, struggling to potentially make changes, right? And feeling particularly inflexible, because it takes a lot of mental resources to be flexible and adjust to changes and challenges. Just this intense lack of energy and motivation, or it could just look like going through the motions and feeling very, very disconnected. So before we start to talk a little bit about tools and strategies, and Annie will take us through those, this is a thing to think about in terms of where am I with burnout? So a single question burnout assessment you can ask yourself is, where are you on this scale? So I enjoy my work and don't have any symptoms, all the way through I feel completely burnt out and I wonder if I can go on, right? And I need to make some changes. So thinking about that, I mean, I would say, if people are comfortable, to put in the chat where you are feeling on this scale, you're welcome to do that. But to think about, anywhere 2 through 5, that it's important to make changes. And that, especially if you're on that lower end, to make some changes and to find some strategies that work for you to manage some of these 3 dimensions now, that helps us so that we don't sort of progressively move into a place where a lot needs to change and we're really struggling. So Annie is going to talk us through sort of addressing burnout, what the goals are, and then we can answer some questions.
Hey, Lori, I think I want to wait a second and just because we're seeing a lot of people posting the range of places that they are. We have 5s, then we have down to 2s. So thank you all for sharing. It's really interesting to see and easy to relate to. So thanks. Yeah, and this last one that just popped up is that it can change from moment to moment. They said I'm at this point, and at other times it's been at this point. So now I'm going to talk about addressing burnout. And as you recall, Lori talked about the 3 dimensions of burnout, sort of exhaustion. It's like, I am just tired. It's the first one, decrease in cynicism and depersonalization cynicism. It's like, I don't care anymore. I just don't care. I don't care about the work. I don't care about the people. And then the third one is a sense of decreased personal efficacy. And that's like, it's not worth it. It won't make any difference anyway. Either I can't do it or the work doesn't matter. We're never going to get anywhere. So those kind of 3 levels of where we are, where burnout can put us. And the goal is to reduce those problematic experiences and instead to replace them with a sense of engagement. So engagement is really the opposite of burnout. And so the strategies, you're engaged in your work, you're feeling engaged in the work itself and in your energy levels and in your efficacy. So addressing engagement is involved in both preventing burnout and in recovering from when we are burned out. So next slide, Lori. So things that you can do. I just want to, before I go into this slide itself, I want to recognize that a couple of things. One, they're hardest to do when we're burnt out because we don't have energy. We don't have physical, emotional, or mental energy. Things are much harder. And so it will look like, as I go through this list, so do you expect me to do all these things and I can't do any of them? So these are not this is not, we don't want to give you an overwhelming list. We're giving you lots of suggestions of things that you can do. It's not, I have to check each one off and move on to the next one. So it's really about finding things that resonate for you, taking care of yourself to the best that you can at the moment. Sort of like rehab if you're burnt out. You start with small steps and you work your way up. So the first group that I'm going to be talking about are things that you can do personally, and then we'll move into talking about ways that they structuring the work environment. And you may not be able to do all of these things, but as I said, which ones will resonate for you? So the first thing is kind of checking in with yourself and figuring out what is going on for me. Am I stressed? Am I just tired? Maybe a weekend off will really take care of it, which is encouraging yourself to do that. Going through the symptoms and that Lori talked about and checking in, reflecting just in your own head, talking to someone who knows you well. Journaling is another way we can talk with ourselves. Other kinds of self-expression. Sometimes people find that they can really get a sense of how they are by, artistic or creative expression as a place to check in with yourself. The second thing is taking care of your body. And so when we're not doing well, it becomes even more important. When we're doing well, we can say, well, I can go on short on sleep, or if I miss a meal here or there, I'll be okay. But when we're really struggling, it is essential to go back to those basics and pay attention to eating at appropriate times and eating at least some healthy food, paying attention to your sleep, and then having some activity, physical exercise, or simply activity in your life, going back to those very basic self-care, and also not harming yourself. So don't abuse recreational substances like alcohol or recreational drugs or screens, because too much time on any of those is counterproductive to how we want to be doing. Another piece of the engagement piece is to also build interests outside of work. If you define yourself solely by your work, when your work is failing, then you feel like a failure. So having time that you can spend meaningfully in activities that you enjoy that are not at the workplace, those things that you say, well, when I get my degree, when I get this grant, when I finish this paper, then I will do those things. Well, maybe you can start doing some of that now. Not to be a whole lot of time, but at least not putting off the things that mean something to you forever. And if you're already doing them, continue to do them and pay attention to the fact, I haven't, I personally like gardening. And if I haven't gardened in a long time, I'll say, I should really get back outside and into the dirt and the plants. And that is something that renews me. And then also we are all, whether we're introverts or extroverts, we are social beings. And so connecting with people that you care about and that you enjoy and who care about you, not just the people that you happen to, that your circumstance would put you in contact with, but being proactive about making sure that you have at least some connection, whether it's texting or talking or in-person gathering, that there are people in your life who care about you, that you see and are part of your weekly, monthly, daily life. The next thing is participating in activities and interests that give you energy, not draining it. So just to use an example for myself, I find when I come home from a stressful day, like 20 minutes, I like to do online word and number puzzles. So like 20 minutes of that kind of allows me to sort of decompress. But if I find like I spent the whole evening doing that, from dinner time to bedtime, I end up feeling pretty crummy about myself. And so moderating the things that you might enjoy, if they become excessive, they can be draining. So paying attention not just to what you do, but how much time you spend in using it. This thing is, the third dimension was feeling like you have no efficacy in your work. So thinking about and having things where you can feel a sense of accomplishment and productivity in your day. It could be something as simple as, I made my bed this morning, or I cleaned off my bench at work, or I opened my laptop, which I've been avoiding doing because I've been overwhelmed by it. Or it could be something, more significant, like I started writing that first paragraph for the abstract. It can be as small as you can chunk it down to as small as it is so that you can do it and not focus on what you're not doing, but focus on what you have done. So doing something and then noticing that you did it so you can get to experience the sense of productivity from it. Next, Lori. Other things that you can do is think about your time. Now, how you're managing your time at work. You may not have control over the pieces that you don't. There may be many parts of that you do not have control over, whether it's the rules of the workplace or the demands of your experiment that requires that you put in these many hours and you be paying attention at these regular times. But looking at that and saying, okay, those are the parts that I have no control over, and these are parts that I do have control over. What can I change or what can I adapt? And the parts that I don't have control over, maybe I can think about, okay, that experiment takes this kind of time. I want to do that at the beginning of the week, not the end of the week. So being really thoughtful about what will be supportive of you, and that you can decide in managing your stress. And then also being intentional about how you use the discretionary time that you have, whether it's at work or at home. And so thinking about it and making decisions yourself rather than just letting it happen and then feeling regrets about how you did it. The next thing on this slide is about managing stress. So there's been a lot of research in recent years. I come from a mental health field about research about brain and mindfulness as being a really important piece of well-being. And so spending time in the present moment is what sort of mindfulness. When we spend time feeling bad about what we did before in the past with regret and shame and embarrassment, or that doesn't help manage our stress, and it certainly doesn't change what happened. You can't go back and redo it. And when we spend time worrying about future things that might happen but might not happen, like this is never going to work, my experiment's never going to work, I'm never going to get this grant, I'm never going to get into the schools that I'm applying to, that's not helpful either. So if we can, in terms of just worrying about it, this is separate from I want to spend time thinking about the past, problem solving and making choices about what I can do now going forward. And this is different than, okay, I have to think about what I need to do to get into grad school. So let me be mindful and thoughtful about what decisions I want to make. I'm talking about not the anxiety and the rehashing that leads to shame and regret. So spending time in the present moment, which we are always in, can be very calming. And you can do that through mindfulness, meditation, being in nature, whatever helps you be in the here and now. Also then developing healthy coping strategies and skills that help us deal with the shame and regret or the anxiety or the overwhelm that we get or the stress that we get. So there are lots and lots of coping skill strategies that you can use. And so thinking about what fits for you and finding ones that fit for you and then using them. And the third piece about managing stress is reflecting on the goodness of fit with your work environment. So it could be that you're an introvert and you're working in a small space with a lot of people, or you're an extrovert and you're working all alone in a research group, or you have sensory issues and the lights and the noise is overwhelming for you. So it can be just about, are there changes that I can make that will help the work fit better for who I am? And also you can think about goodness of fit in terms of perhaps your career path. Is this the right direction that I want to go in? And so if you're going to reflect on any of those, whether it's the sensory and the immediate environment or what career direction you want to go in, it might be useful. It could be very useful to use resources to help you either get the changes you want or process the thinking and decisions that you want to make. So getting trainings on not just goodness of fit, but on areas that you need support. I'm overwhelmed because I have to do all this and I have no idea how to do it. My PI expects me to run these tests and I don't know how to use that piece of equipment. I tried it and it never works. So maybe I need more training and more skills. Maybe I need coaching on how, on task initiation. Or maybe I need guidance about my career. I'm not really sure what direction I want to go, and I'm beginning to wonder if science isn't the place for me. So, and getting those kind of supports develop personal and also professional skills. Another resource that's really great is support groups. I know if you're at NIH, OIT offers a lot of them, and if you're elsewhere, finding ones in your community or at your institution, support groups of people who are struggling with similar things to you. You both feel not alone, and also you can get ideas and strategies that are helpful. And finally, therapy can be really helpful when you're really struggling. Professional support in that way. Thanks, Lori. So one of the things that can get in the way when we are trying to address these things is we're all human beings, and we all come equipped with our own personal challenges. And so some of the which are not our fault, that's just comes with the nature of the environment, but paying attention to them and recognizing what they are allows us to problem solve and address them. So some possible barriers that you may come with, I know I show up on this list, that may be barriers to your own well-being and that can impact burnout, include things like perfectionism. If it's not perfect, it's no good at all. That's a all or nothing. Or if I can't do it perfectly, why do it at all? Or I keep redoing and redoing and redoing this to try and get it perfect, and that can really increase your vulnerability to burnout. Procrastination can come from perfectionism. It can come from executive functioning issues, other ways, but procrastination, avoiding doing work, can also lead to burnout. Then we have those stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Imposter fears is a really common one, which is, I'm not good enough at this, I don't really belong here, and everybody's going to find out, or the people are going to find out. And so it's both the fear of not fitting and the fear of being found out. But there are a lot of distorted stories that we tell ourselves that undermine us. And then being compassionate, so lack of self-compassion, feelings of guilt or shame. We treat ourselves in ways that we would never treat a friend. Fear of what other people might think of us, or wanting them to like us or to approve us. This fear, I need the letter of recommendation, that may be holding us back from really speaking out. Or not saying no, and I may agree to more things that I'm capable of doing. That's possible for me to do. That can lead to burnout. The next one about unhelpful beliefs around assertiveness, I want to say that assertiveness can be very culturally driven, depending on what world you grew up in, what community or what family or what culture you grew up in. And so recognizing that there isn't one way to be assertive. Sharon gives a great talk, Sharon Milgram, in the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series about assertiveness. But whatever your cultural value is, still you have to, thinking about how I can do this in a way that resonates for me and is okay, that I can take care of myself and put appropriate boundaries and limits and exercise my assertiveness skills in a way that resonates, is consistent with my value system. So some of the ways we can address these internal barriers to our well-being, first of all, again, is going back and thinking about being self-aware. So with journaling or reflection, thinking about what your own barriers might be, and then getting help. So it can be to do with that. Workshops, training, and education. I mentioned the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, and we'll have a link for that at the end. Also getting support from professionals, coaching, therapy that can help us address those barriers. Next one, Lori. So the next piece of what we're going to talk about, so those are individual things that we should think about and that we can do. The next piece is that burnout is a workplace issue, and so the workplace is a major contributor to it. So some of these things may or may not be in your control personally, depending on what your position is. If you're a program director, a PI, a boss, you may have more control over some of it. If you are a student, a trainee, an employee, you may not be able to determine whether this exists or not, but you might be able to influence whether these things are in your workplace. You might be able to advocate for them. And if they do exist, you might be able to take advantage of them. So the first supportive workplace environment starts with when someone first joins the workplace, is an adequate orientation. So that includes what skills are going to be expected of you, what skills are offered, who the supports are, who you go to for support. It's a whole lot of pieces of setting up clearly so you can make informed decisions and telling you what you do if you have concerns or problems. So that fleshed out fully adequate orientation. And it includes the next step, which is clear expectations. This is what we expect of you, the workplace expects of you. This is what you can expect from the workplace, what supports. Here's how to deal with, so that you all start out on the same page at least. Gives you a better chance of things going well if you're on the same page. So once someone is in the workplace, then allowing for reasonable flexibility and accommodations, either to meet their long-term needs or to meet short-term needs. So flexibility on the part of both, of everybody involved, in accommodating needs that are articulated or needs that come to be recognized as time goes on. Obviously, we're talking about the biomedical research community, so scientific and professional trainings to set you up to maximize success, both in terms of your career advancement, in terms of your workplace skills, and then in terms of your personal well-being and resilience. So recognizing that the human, that we are whole beings, and that workplace success is not just dependent on the scientific skills, but also on the human and well-being skills. When we're not doing well, we can't do our work well. So having support for that human aspect of us. Then the next piece is having a healthy work environment. So this is on an ongoing basis. So psychological safety refers to the ability that you can ask questions, you can make mistakes, you can disagree. All of those things can happen in the workplace without fear of being retribution or harm coming from that. That it's safe to do that, safe to be a learning and growing, contributing member of the workplace without risk. Fair treatment for you and for everyone else. It's both if you feel you've been poorly treated or if you witness people being poorly treated, those both can impact our levels of stress and increase burnout risk. Appropriate boundaries that are not only set in appropriate places, but that they are neither too porous nor too rigid, so that we can function as human beings. The next one, obviously, getting support. So ongoing and consistent advising, coaching, mentoring, those things that allow us to continue to grow and function. A workplace that focuses on strengths, not just on mistakes and challenges, but recognizes our strengths and encourages autonomy over the work rather than micromanaging, but also rather than abandoning. So a sense of autonomy of your work and a sense of influence over what the work is and what the work outcomes will be, so you can have a voice in the decisions about the work. And then also a recognition of both efforts, progress, and achievement. So we don't wait until we've gotten the grant or the publication to celebrate, but we recognize all along the process, efforts done, work done. Gives us a real sense that what we're doing is valuable and addresses the feelings of efficacy in our work. Finally, knowing and using resources and supports. So a workplace that tells us what the resources are and then allows us to have access to them. So it's not like, yeah, there are these great support groups, but you can't take time to go to them, is not a supportive workplace. And then finally, addressing issues as they start to arise. Don't wait until things get really bad. If we are monitoring ourselves, if the workplace is supportive, then hopefully we can address these concerns as we're moving towards burnout, but not waiting until we are burnt out. Thanks, Lori. Next. So this is we talked a lot about, or I've talked a lot about recognizing how you're doing. And so here are some journaling reflections that you might consider. The slides are going to be made available to everybody. So things to think about. This is for the kind of just checking in, seeing where you are, but it's not about what I can do with it. So just like the single question, here's multiple questions about your sense of your enjoyment of work, your control over your work, your level of how hard you're working, how you're feeling at work, how enmeshed you are in your work, how much you can let go of it. So these are kind of prompts that you can start out with, reflect on either in your own head or journaling them, either in writing, or some people do tape journals. But kind of start conversation with you about how you're doing and about your relationship with your work. And as I said, these will be available for you to take and consider. Thanks. Next, Lori. So then the next, so those were sort of, the first reflection was how you're doing. The second group of reflections for journaling is about your relationship with work. So it's really important to be thinking about, do I define myself solely by my work? Do I ever talk or think about anything else? Is my sense of self-worth based on how my work is going? On the other extreme is maybe am I interested in still? Do I feel like it's going anywhere? What kind of mood does it put me in? So kind of reflecting on that and other thoughts you might have about your relationship with work. And then in this one here, it's not just an assessment of how you're doing, but the next step is, okay, I kind of know where I am. What kind of changes do I want to make? And what kind of changes can I make? What are some things that are in my control that I could change? What are things that I can do to make my work more engaging to me? What are things I can do to make my work schedule work better for me? What are things that I can do that help build a life outside of work? So these are journaling prompts. Again, they'll be available to you. I should highly recommend that you think about these things and other kinds of changes that you might want to be able to make. And then here is kind of a weekly check-in for yourself. Either there's another way of looking at your relationship with work and how you're doing and your relationship with burnout. So first of all, how do I feel on Sunday when I think about going to work on Monday? I know a lot of people are like, oh, rather than, oh, I can't wait to go back to that. So thinking about that. And then how do I feel on Friday when I look back at the work week? At the end of the work week, I want to reflect back on how the work week went. So those are two ways of kind of checking in about how you're doing. And then after you ask yourself those questions, what are some things that you can do to decrease the heavy lift? What help can I ask for? What rearranging can I do? Who can I explain this to that would benefit from knowing how I'm doing or might be able to help me? Either what are some longer term trends that I want to reflect on? So this is a short term reflection, but does it of the week, but it may bring up long term questions for you about what am I doing and why do I want to be doing this? What do I want to be doing differently? And then again, back to how do I take care of myself? So those are three different kinds of sets of journaling prompts that I recommend you start with, but encourage you to journal or reflect on any kinds of questions that you want. Those are just recommendations for you. I think a lot of us find it hard to journal without a prompt or like just an open-ended like burnout. I don't know. So those are some suggestions for you. So kind of in summary, this is the last slide presentation and so kind of in summary, the steps to burnout recovery. So first of all is recognizing and acknowledging the burnout. So it may be as we went through this, you said, well, I'm actually not completely burned out. I have, I fit on these dimensions and not on these other ones. Well, stop and, you don't have to wait until you get full-fledged burnout to take care of yourself. So recognizing where you are, and then reviewing that and problem solving the parts that you need to problem solve. So you identified some of the triggers, some of the ways that it presents for you. And so reviewing that and problem solving what needs to be addressed and what are some ways I might address that, and then making those changes. So it falls on you. Now, some of the things that we've talked about are in your control. Some are not, but perhaps you can influence them. But even if you can't control the things you can't control, there are still changes you can make that can make a big difference in your well-being. And so focusing on that rather than focusing on, well, I work in a very tough environment and so burnout is inevitable, there's nothing I can do. There are things you can do to take care of yourself. So really encouraging you to do the self-care, to examine your relationship with work, to utilize supports and resources, and to advocate for that healthy work environment. So thank you all very much. Lori and I are going to, if there are questions in the Q&A, Lori and, oh, yes. These are two resources I talked to. Well, let me just finish my sentence. Lori and I will take questions in a second. But these are two of the OIT resources that are open to anybody, whether you're at NIH or not. The YouTube channel, and then also, as I mentioned before, the series Becoming a Resilient Scientist. And encourage you to take advantage of those resources and any other ones that you may know of or have access to.
So we have a bit of time, so I will try to go through these questions, and sometimes our answers will be, it depends, where it's context dependent. But the first one was, a question about differentiating between burnout and other mental health needs, especially when providing mentorship. I'm sorry, my dog's maybe going to start barking, but I think when you're working with other people, especially as a mentor, I think it's pretty critical to not make guesses about what's mental health, or try to sort of provide diagnostics, but rather to just check in, where are you at, what's going on, what's hard, and sticking really often to what you're observing. This is what I'm noticing, and how can we make sure that we get you to the right supports, whether it's shifting and changing and seeing what supports we can do within the research group, as well as what other supports does our institute have, to make sure that you are succeeding and you're doing well and that you have a sense of efficacy. So I think differentiating when you're thinking about someone else is really important, to just check in with the person and see how they're doing, stick to observations, and sort of encourage support and create a supportive environment. I think when it comes to yourself, sometimes some of that self-reflection is pretty critical about what's going on. And it may be that burnout and mental health feel particularly intertwined. That's not so atypical. So it sort of ends up with the same answer, which is not trying to do it alone, especially if you're sort of struggling with burnout or mental health needs, to make sure you're taking care of yourself using those strategies and getting external supports. That's my main thought. And I'm just curious if anyone wants to add anything.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that, if you are a mentor or a supervisor or a PI or a director, is that you can also look at, I don't know, as Lori said, you're not going to diagnose them. You don't know whether it's burnout or not, but you can look at what kind of environment you're offering to them and think about the changes that you can make that would support them, whether it, particularly if it's burnout, but even if it's not, the things that you can do that would be helpful to them.
So there is a question on the impact of burnout sort of on engagement and interactions on a personal level, as well as engagement and interactions from a collegial level. I think that when you're struggling with burnout, particularly when work is a huge part of life, as it often is as a biomedical researcher, that can carry over, right? It carries to home. And, how that looks specifically across your interpersonal interactions, whether that's we talked about avoidance, we talked about blame, we talked about outbursts, we talked about irritability, we talked about exhaustion. I mean, you can imagine how all of those things, while they show up at work, they can show up at home too, depending on if you're able to sort of the intensity at which you're feeling burnt out. And, as you are feeling dysregulated and like you can't take care of yourself, you imagine that those can show up sort of across the board. So it can happen, that it not only is a career effect, but it is personal effect too.
Yeah, and I think also, you can, two things. One, we can blame in our personal life, we can put more blame on people. They're supposed to know that I'm burned out and take care of me, rather than communicating, this is how I'm doing. These are things that would be helpful to me because I'm burned out at work and it follows me home. So how you manage it with the people in your life can also be more helpful or not.
So there's a few questions about career decision-making in burnout. I think something that's pretty critical to think about is not making decisions right in the heat of things. And also, so there's a saying, right? Strike when the iron is cold a little bit. So thinking about not making decisions based solely on that, as well as not making decisions alone. Sometimes it's hard to make a decision to get out of the burnout enough for enough time to make a decision. So you may be thinking like, that's a nice idea, but I'm always feeling burnt out. So how am I ever going to make a decision? So I think in those cases, to make sure that you're using supports to have conversations, going to people who have an understanding of you. So maybe that's outside of science, maybe that's friends, family, trusted others, therapists, but also people who have an understanding of the trajectory of the career. So finding a trusted mentor, if you know, whether that's someone that you used to work with or someone at your institutional level, to have those conversations, I think that's pretty critical so that you can, the way that we're feeling emotionally, I kind of think of them as lights on our dashboard in our car. They tell us something's going on. And so we have to attend to them, but we can't make decisions based solely off of them, right? We have to go to someone who's an expert to help us and get support with that. So I think those are the pieces of the puzzle that I might recommend rather than making sort of these decisions in the heat of it. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that really, just underlining using trusted and valued and clear thinking resources.
So we have some recommendations in the Q&A about different resources some podcasts, a book called Chained to the Desk. I haven't listened to those myself, or Self-Compassionate Professor, or Your Unapologetic Career, someone making recommendations around those. I think there's also a lot of questions about the environment and how much we can expect from the environment and how much sort of the system plays into burnout and how critical that is. So I think that that's really a very fair point, right? That the environment is a huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to burnout, and that culture change is needed to support less burnout. As Annie pointed out, there are also individual things you can do. So I think it's an interplay between individual and environment, and thinking about not only is the environment right for me, but are there pieces of the environment that I could change? Is there a way to advocate for myself? Are there people that might listen and benefit from knowing what's going on? So I think that there's an interplay between that. And I don't think that it's necessarily one thing or another thing, that there is an interplay, and sort of focusing on where are the areas that I have control in this as you are experiencing burnout or you're moving towards burnout, and where are the areas I don't have control. And in some of the areas where I don't have control, are there more larger cultural efforts that I can get involved in? Annie, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons that we started all of this work, is that the culture of science needs to change. There are some wonderful groups and some wonderful places, and there are still some very toxic ones or very difficult ones. And so if you're finding yourself in a toxic culture, in a toxic lab or research group, one thing is like, what do I need to take care of myself? It may be that you need to leave, and it may be, and having, as Lori said, that conversation with support and considering it. But it may be that there are reasons to stay that are valuable to you. And so then how do I take care of myself if I've made the choice to stay in this group? And so given that you may not be able to make the group different, but you might have an influence that you don't know about. And so, but even so, what are things that I can do to help me in the other dimensions if I can't change the expectations about the work hours, the way that we're only criticized and we're never supported, the way I don't have control over what I'm going to do. So thinking about, okay, I made a decision to stay. What can I do to support myself if I'm doing that decision? And who are the resources that can support me in doing that?
There's a question about sort of burnout as a phase, right? Whether that's something that comes and goes, sometimes it returns, sometimes there's prevention. So I think this is a really good question. My experience with burnout in working with just, people across all high achieving careers, and maybe particularly biomedical researchers, is that if you can recognize it coming that really helps. Burnout absolutely can come and go. These feelings come and go, right? They're not unchangeable. They're not immovable. And they may be, you know, higher workloads, higher demands, more challenges, something changing in your personal life, you may experience burnout. So one, setting up some prevention. I mean, I think prevention is always helpful in any kind of stress management or really anything. Prevention is wonderful. So setting up some ways, if you know, okay, I'm the kind of person that I really need to take a break, or in the winter, I really need to spend some extra time being kind to myself because the weather affects me, or whatever it is. So setting up prevention can be really helpful. Also noticing when if you're at a 1, when you're starting to get to a 2, or if you're at a 2, when you're starting to move to a 3. When you notice those things and you say, okay, what are the things that are helpful to me? That is really important, because then you'll be able to catch it quicker. It's easier to recover from if you're not all the way at sort of at a 5. So I think having sort of the self-awareness of what it feels like for you, or what your signs are, or even telling someone else, hey, these are the signs of when I get burnt out, that can be really useful. Annie, do you have anything else?
I just want to, and I don't think the person who asked this question used it in this way, but the term "it's just a phase" can be very sort of belittling of a very real experience, and it's as if it's your fault if it's a phase. So I want, if you're at a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5, is self-blame is not helpful at all, and not like I should be able to, this is a phase, I should be able to will myself out of it, or I shouldn't go there. I'm blaming myself for it. So I'm not saying that the question asked that, but we can tend to go there. And so it isn't a question of self-blame. We don't blame ourselves, you know, if we get the flu, and you don't blame yourselves if you get burnout.
So I think that there's another question about sort of that piece of the puzzle around interest and motivation, particularly about the intensity of that being impacted by feedback and criticism, and that even sort of moving situations, you know, that there will be feedback and potentially criticism across the board. So I think this is going to be one of my it depends answers, but you know, I think it's pretty important to examine what's going on with your motivation and your interest in a way that's both rooted in self-awareness, trying to take a look at what's going on for you, but also talking to someone else, because the lack of motivation can come from a lot of things. The frustration with criticism and feedback can also come from a lot of things. So by taking a look at what's actually going on for you, where you're feeling, where this might be coming from, you might have a sort of a chance to address some of those barriers that Annie was talking about, of whatever it is that's underlying that. And that is going to be very personal, and is going to, in a lot of cases, be really aided by additional support from people that you trust. So I would say, you know, it's very hard to say, okay, well, this is motivation is a blanket issue, versus what about the motivation, what about the struggles are going on for you. So I know we keep saying this, but just sort of look at what's going on for you and then get support in that, is sort of maybe the key takeaway. Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it. I think that's sort of recognizing that, yes, again, I want to recommend the resource of Becoming a Resilient Scientist, because it talks a lot. You talked about getting feedback and tolerating criticism, and that can help you sort of figure out, is this a reasonable criticism? Is this a reasonably delivered criticism? Is this an unhelpful way that, or a toxic way that criticism and feedback is being given? And so it can help you kind of get a baseline of what is sort of appropriately reasonable, and help you then to figure out, okay, what do I want to do about that? Maybe that's another way of recognizing, is this about me? Is this whether I'm struggling, or is this the fact that this is the environment I'm in that is not supportive?
So there's some questions about sort of like productivity and burnout, and feeling like, you know, can you feel burnt out for a very long period of time? And especially if you're not feeling productive, it feels hard to be burnt out. Now, sort of keep in mind that there are those subtypes of burnout, right? Oftentimes when you're not feeling productive, that's exactly when you may be feeling burnt out, right? When you're not getting a lot done. You can sort of, especially on that last piece of burnout, which is that reduced efficacy, right? That even can lead to feeling like you're not being productive or not being efficacious. And so I think burnout can last for a while if we don't address it. And I want to just consider and acknowledge, like, I think we don't end up in this one talking about the pandemic very often, but we didn't bring that up, but the last several years, it's been really, really hard. And so thinking about, like, if you felt burnout for a while, potentially, if you can pinpoint to, yeah, I started feeling this in the pandemic, it would make sense that if it's not been addressed, that it would continue on. So I think that makes a ton of sense. And there's also the underwhelmed burnout, where you're feeling like maybe not productive, or there isn't a lot to do. If you're in a place where you're maybe, writing a dissertation or you don't have a lot of structure, I might recommend sort of going back and thinking about what is it that helps me feel efficacious, and putting some of those into place. So maybe that's creating your own structure. Maybe that's having accountability with other people. But that's, I think, can be really helpful for that underwhelmed area of burnout. Annie, any thoughts?
You can also, if the work is at this moment, I just have to do the stuff that is underwhelming for me, you can add stimulation and challenge in other places of your life. So that, I was talking to a grad student who's been struggling to finish their project and write their dissertation, and they go rock climbing once a week to give themselves sort of a challenge in the sense of accomplishment, So finding other ways to get it, if you can't get it at work, because at this period of time, you don't want a career that isn't stimulating, but you may have moments in your life.
So there's a question about burnout sort of going the other way. So personal life burnout, and then that impacting work. I think that you can take, we're really talking about job burnout, but you can take those 3 dimensions and apply them to any area of your life, and that the impact of burnout, when it's strong enough, can really impact across. So thinking about taking care of yourself, particularly when there's also personal demands, is obviously important, because if you can be a little level 5 across the board, it's going to impact your personal life and potentially your work life. Distinguishing burnout from depression, we kind of talked about already, that distinguishing that's going to really take a look at both internally and also with supports, and that those interplay, and they're going to be hard to sort of differentiate. I want to also think defining as toxic. Is it always well, I never say anything is always, but sort of defining toxic. It's a really good question. I think that I see toxic labs as labs where there's harm. If you're experiencing harm, we talked about maltreatment, we talked about lack of psychological safety, we talked about retaliation. So I think that when we use the word toxic, that's what we're talking about. And that obviously can contribute to the feelings of burnout if you're feeling sort of depersonalized, and there's, cynicism based in that as well. There could be exhaustion and lack of efficacy. That's when we were thinking about toxic, that's what we're thinking about. Annie, do you have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's always, it's also checking in with other people. So talking to other people in the environment and seeing what their experience is, getting a reality check. I think that my experience with people at NIH is that they will tolerate toxic work environments and blame themselves for it. If like I should be doing better, there's something I can make. So that kind of, again, checking in with professionals, with colleagues, with other people who can help you sort that out. This may not be something you can figure out on your own because you're in the middle of it.
So there's another
funding.
There's lots of questions. There's another question around toxicity that I want to think about, which is sort of how do you manage that and how do you deal with that? So that is the piece of the question of like, what's in my control, right? So I want to think about sort of additional resources. So the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, if you are a trainee, or the Raising a Resilient Scientist series, if you're a mentor, to kind of think about different ways to manage that. But oftentimes when there's aggression, when there's bullying, not trying to manage that on your own, right? I think that it's really hard to take all of that on and manage all of those interpersonal dynamics, the fact that you're seeing them. If you have someone trusted in the lab or a research group, or you feel like you can go to someone hierarchical to have conversations with them, whether it's in your institute or within your institution, or even like external support staff of student offices or offices of affairs or ombudsman. So making sure that you're not trying to take all of that on your own, but that you also, like, where are you comfortable? Who do you trust? And who can you have safe conversations with within your group and externally to your group, so that you can work on addressing culture. And the truth is, culture change is hard, and we acknowledge it in these talks because it's really important, and there can be really too much of a internal, this is my thing and I need to get over it. And sometimes there are internal factors, and sometimes there are external, and most of the time it's both, right? Most of the time there's things we can do inside of ourselves. Some of the times there's things that need to be done in the culture, and we need to sort of be able to support both pieces of it. But I do appreciate that, like, when you do see toxic culture, that you want to jump in and help. Annie, any other thoughts?
No, I just noticing time, but I want to address the burnout versus laziness. I think, we often see they're lazy, they're not motivated, they're the problem, rather than, which is always possible. People can be lazy, they can be not motivated. But I think my perspective is more often not that there's something, what's going on that is perhaps contributing to the behavior that we're seeing. So when you're thinking about other people, not, again, Lori said, don't diagnose, don't jump to conclusions or make assumptions about them, whether it's assuming that they have a mental health disorder or a neurodiversity definition, or whether they are lazy. It's rather being curious and trying to figure out what's happening and what can we do to support you. These are the behaviors I'm noticing. So rather than pathologizing, it's talking about behaviors, noticing these behaviors, what changes can we make?
Yeah.
And what support can we give?
I think science is helped by assuming positive intent about what's going on for other people. So I think, or just interactions in general. So sort of taking a look at our own biases about what's going on for people and our own frustrations and what's going on for us and how, that impacts things. And asking questions to learn about what's going on while sort of holding positive intent for the other person often gets us a lot farther and helps us support the science in general, as well as the well-being of ourselves and others. So I think that's, I appreciate all of the questions, and Uli will send out the slides, and we encourage you to join us for Thriving Thursdays for more questions and discussions, and continue the series.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and we are really happy that we seems to hit the right nerve here, because I can see that a lot of people in the chat also are grateful that we addressed this. So please join us next Thursday, and as Laurie just said, we will share the resources with you, and if you have questions, you are always welcome to email us. So with that, and on the time, 5:15, thank you everybody, and I wish you a wonderful rest of today.